Today we'll be taking a look at the Pulsar X2H Medium and Mini, going over the shape, specs, and other features of these mice, as well as testing their wireless latency.
Before we start, I'd like to extend a big thanks to Pulsar for sending these mice out to us. As usual, this will not affect our review in any way.
For reference, in this section, my hands are about 18 by 10 centimeters, while Eric's are around 18.5 by 10 centimeters.
The X2H has a rather interesting shape, as it is a version of the standard X2 with a higher, more pronounced hump and more curved sides. The X2H gets wider than the X2 towards the back flare and is narrower at the grip, which makes it easier to consistently place the pinky finger when curled back. The more pronounced hump on the X2H pushes up against and fills out the center of the palm in a claw grip, and angles my hand further back, making the mouse feel longer than it actually is. Meanwhile, the regular X2 more evenly contacts all areas of my palm. Inner hand micro adjustments are basically impossible on the X2H, and additionally the width of the hump on the X2H pushes my pinky knuckle further out and prevents my pinky finger from being supported when extended towards the front of the mouse. The buttons on the X2H, however, do have slightly less intense comfort grooves than on the X2. The X2H Mini is just an exactly scaled down version of the Medium. The smaller hump of the Mini fills out much less of my palm, though it still hits the same center area. It was initially thought that the X2H would be similar to the Zowie ZA13 in shape. However, the mice feel extremely different in hand. The ZA13 is much flatter at the back end of the mouse, which means it contacts the sides of my palms and doesn't push into the center like the X2H does. Additionally, the ZA is proportionally thinner and taller than the X2H, giving it a more precise feel while also contacting the palm more at the knuckle area. This contact at the knuckle area gives me a bit more control than I have on the X2H, and I definitely prefer the ZA13 shape just a bit. In terms of feel, the Cooler Master MM712 matches the X2H Mini quite well, as it also has a pronounced hump which hits the center of the palm. However, the MM712 is flatter at the top, whereas the X2H Mini feels a bit higher and thinner. Additionally, the side curvature on the two mice is very different, as the MM712 tapers inwards far further forward than the X2H Mini. Personally, I feel the hump of the X2H and the X2H Mini might just be a bit too aggressive, as I don't see there being significant benefit to the extreme palm contact towards the center. Still, I aim quite well on both mice, with the Medium surprisingly working better for me than the Mini. The Medium is one of my top 5 performers, though it's still far surpassed for me by the Lethal Gaming Gear LA1. I would most recommend the X2H Medium for aggressive claw grip for those with 18 by 10 to 23 by 12 cm hands, relaxed claw for those with 19 by 11 to 21 by 12 cm hands, pincer claw for those with 18 by 10.5 to 22 by 13 cm hands, and knuckle claw for those with hands larger than 19 by 10 cm. I would most recommend the X2H Mini for aggressive claw grip for those with 17 by 9 to 21 by 11 cm hands, relaxed claw for those with 17 by 10 to 19 by 11 cm hands, pincer claw for those with 17 by 9.5 to 20 by 12 cm hands, and knuckle claw for those with 18 by 9 to 22 by 11 cm hands.
The X2H is built like a tank, absolutely zero flexing or creaking anywhere on it no matter how hard I press. This is probably the best build quality I have felt in a very long time, possibly only surpassed by the XM2WE's build quality. And the most impressive part about all of this is that you get that extremely good build quality in a very light mouse, at just 52 grams for the Mini and 55 for the Medium. Additionally, the weight balancing feels pretty good as well. Maybe slightly back heavy, but in hand it feels quite nice in terms of weight balancing. The X2H, as well as other new Pulsar mice, use the Nordic NRF 52840 MCU and are all compatible with a 4K dongle which they sell separately. The polling stability is quite good at 1K, 2K, and 4K Hertz. The X2H uses a 3395 sensor, which has built-in motion sync capability. The motion sync implementation is solid, similar to other mice which use Nordic MCUs with complex firmware. The click latency at 1K Hz is decent, sitting at around 1.9 milliseconds with a debounce set to 0. Raising to 2K, we get a lower click latency of just 1 millisecond in our testing, which is on par with other wireless 2000 Hz mice. At 4K, we see measured click latency at 0.8 milliseconds, which is the same as Lamzu mice at 4K Hz.
We have been working on revamping our testing setup and writing code to better analyze mouse tester data, which will help us more accurately measure motion latency. Unfortunately, our motion latency setup is not quite ready yet, so we will not be able to include the results in this review. Our previous testing, however, puts the motion latency of the X2H on par with Lamzu mice at all polling rates, which makes sense as Lamzu and Pulsar both use complex firmware.
The battery life on the X2H is fairly respectable. advertised at 70 hours on 1000 Hz polling, which seems pretty accurate in our testing given that it lasted over a week of use in that 1K Hz polling without needing to be recharged at all. Additionally, the mouse should last about 40 hours on 2K polling and about 24 hours on 4K. The X2H uses Razer opticals, which are fairly light. This implementation of them has next to no post-travel and just a bit of pre-travel depending on where on the trigger you click. The further down on the trigger you click, the more it feels like the trigger is floating above the switch, causing there to be some pre-travel where it feels like you're clicking nothing at all. However, this doesn't really affect me much in use, despite clicking quite far down, but it is still worth noting. Additionally, the white version of the mouse that we received has quite heavier and more snappy clicks compared to both the black units we have. Compared to the Lamzu Thorn, I'd say the X2H clicks are around as tactile, a tiny bit heavier. However, the rebound does feel a bit slower on them, making them a bit harder to spam compared to the Thorn. Overall, I'd say the Thorn switches feel a bit closer to being mechanical than those on the X2H. Additionally, compared to the Viper V2 Pro, the X2H clicks are much less tactile and snappy. Overall, these are not my favorite implementation of opticals, yet they are far from my least favorite and have not given me any trouble in use. The side buttons feel great. They have good travel and feel quite snappy and spammable. In terms of the scroll wheel, there's quite a bit of variance between our 4 different review units. The scroll on our Mini has weaker, more undefined steps, while our 2 black medium units have more defined steps, and our white medium unit has extremely tactile steps with much tighter tensioning. The scroll clicks also have some variance. Our white unit has much heavier and more tactile scroll click than the very light scroll clicks of the black units. Additionally, one of our units does have a defective scroll click where it doesn't rebound correctly some of the time. This issue with the scroll wheel is a bit disappointing to see. However, it is the only real issue I found with the mouse.
The coating on the X2H is a rubberized plastic and feels extremely grippy for both dry and sweaty hands. This coating is very similar to, if not better than that of any computer mice, and is among the best coatings I've tried. The PTFE skates are quite good, with reasonable surface area, good thickness, and well-rounded edges. These are among the best stock skates on the market, though perhaps not as good as the very best like those from Lamzu. The X2H has adjustable debounce down to 0 milliseconds, which allows most clicks to be registered. However, mice using Nordic MCUs with complex firmware have a CPS cap of around 28, meaning I do not recommend them for drag clicking. For butterfly clicking, the buttons on the X2H are fairly wide and easy to hit, allowing me to reach over 20 CPS easily on both buttons. For jitter clicking, the light yet well-tensioned buttons allow me to hit 14 to 15 CPS on the mouse.
This is a really well-built, lightweight, fantastic feeling mouse, and without a doubt deserves to be right up there with other top-tier mice in S tier on our tier list. The only things that potentially hold this back are some potential quality issues with the scroll wheel, and the fact that it has a rather aggressive shape that doesn't necessarily work for that many grips. In terms of value, the X2H comes in at $100 for the mouse and another $20 for the dongle that allows for 2K and 4K Hertz polling. This isn't a cheap mouse by any means, but it also isn't crazy expensive like some other releases we've seen recently. Logitech.